My name is Mara Ellison, and for most of my life, I have been told that I am the steady one, the dependable daughter, the last person to raise her voice at the dinner table, the one who stays late after family gatherings to put the chairs back by the wall and pack leftovers in mismatched Tupperware, while everyone else floats off like soap bubbles, glistening and careless. If you'd asked me a year ago what I wanted most, I would have said something vague about stability and maybe a weekend without work emails. Something responsible. Something small. I didn't know how to admit that I wanted things I was taught not to want. Recognition, security, a seat at the head of a table I'd spent years setting. My father, Patrick, was a man who could tame chaos with a calm sentence and a striped tie. He ran a chain of neighborhood hardware stores with a flair for knowing everyone's name and favorite drill bit. He loved three things openly: practical jokes, cinnamon tea, and me. He loved something else privately: keeping peace where there was none. And in the quiet corners of our house, where he slid bills into envelopes and pretended my mother's sighs were breezes, he loved that I made his life easier just by saying, "Don't worry, Dad, I've got it." My mother, Lydia, was beautiful and brittle, like a champagne flute. She could look at a room and know how it should be, what should be hung, folded, put away on. She tried to do the same with us. Life, to her, was a series of corrections, a straightened picture frame, an ironed shirt, a smile that didn't show too much gum. She had grown up with less than what she believed she deserved, and she married my father, so she would never know less again. That was the story she told herself when she shipped my older brother, Caleb, off to a summer program instead of family vacation. Opportunities, she'd say, not looking at anyone. They don't come on their own. Caleb was born golden and almost stayed that way. He had the kind of handsomeness that makes adults nod approvingly athletic, clean-cut dimples like parenthesis. If charm were a language, he was fluent from birth. If consequences were a currency, he never had to pay. He ended up in sales, then real estate, then consulting, which I later learned meant something between bragging and breakfast. He was good at getting people to do things for him. He was very good at letting me be the one who kept those things from collapsing afterward. We, the Ellisons, had a fourth orbit: Aunt Viv, my mother's younger sister, and her daughter. Naomi, my cousin, childhood playmate, teenage rival, adult. What? The word friend never fit? Neither did enemy. We were like a palm and its shadow, attached by history, mismatched by inclination. Naomi was beautiful in the way of magazine perfume, ad sharp cheekbones, sleek hair, a laugh that sounded like it came with an echo. She had a talent for materializing when attention did. When we were kids, she'd brush my hair and tell me, "Your face comes alive when you smile," and then I'd catch her practicing my smile in the mirror. As adults, the pattern calcified. Naomi tried acting, then influencing, then brand partnerships. She was always on the verge in discussions, about to be featured. She wasn't untalented. She was just allergic to waiting. "Why are you always so patient?" she'd ask me when I was folding napkins at Thanksgiving because the caterer was late, or checking the weather for my father's store deliveries. Patience is just prettified fear. Or practice, I'd say. And she'd look at me as if I were praising mediocrity. I lived 2 blocks from my parents in a little upstairs apartment with slanted ceilings and a perpetually humming radiator. I worked as the operations manager for Dad's store's inventory, scheduling, negotiating with suppliers who would try to charge him extra for being trusting. I sometimes dreamed of opening a community workshop in one of the back rooms. Weekend classes on fixing lamps, replacing sink valves, building garden boxes. Dad liked the idea. "We could call it Learn and Mend," he said, stirring his tea with a thrift store spoon shaped like a leaf. "You always were good with mend." "Fix," I corrected, smiling. "Mend sounds like what you do when the sweater's already ruined." "I stand by mend," he said. "It assumes there's something worth keeping." We had a way of talking like that, sidelong and kind, because it was easier than naming the things we couldn't fix. My mother's loneliness, which expressed itself as ambition. Caleb's aimlessness, which wore a blazer. Naomi's hunger, which hid beneath a vocabulary of manifesting and mood boards. And though I didn't know it at the time, the quiet tremor at the center of our family that would one day become a fault line. The tremor became audible during my father's last year. He began forgetting orders, misplacing his keys in the freezer, calling me honey when he'd always called me kiddo. Mom said he was tired. I said I'd take on more. I divided his calendar into 2 columns. Mara and Dad. The Dad column grew gray and blank as I moved items into mine. At night, I wanted to cry. But the cry felt less like tears and more like a scream pressed flat and ironed smooth so it would fit into my throat. We never said the word dementia. It felt like invoking an enemy we couldn't beat. But I began labeling drawers with index cards, spoons, towels, receipts. And he began calling the hammer the silver friend. He laughed about it, pretending it was a quirk. I laughed too, because humor gives shape to panic. Mom sharpened her days into checklists and insisted everything was fine, as if checking the box fine could preserve the concept. You're not alone. I told Dad one evening when the tricky bulb above the sink hummed and buzzed and refused to commit to lit. We'll figure this out together. I know you will, he said, squeezing my hand, and then added, after a beat, I'm sorry. For what? For asking you to be the steady one for so long. He cleared his throat the way people do when they try to fold grief into patience. You deserve something steadier than me. I have you, I said, and he looked away as if the compliment stung. The first time we visited the lawyer, I assumed we were just getting things in order, as Mom put it. The office was more house than office and old. Victorian, refitted with glass walls and a receptionist who whispered as if someone might be sleeping. Mr. Hale, our family attorney, wore a navy suit that had known many careful dry cleanings and an expression that suggested he'd seen families at both their best and their worst. He asked Dad to confirm names and dates, and Dad did, with a deliberate confidence that made my heart fold in on itself. He was practicing being okay for my sake. He signed a stack of documents while I watched his hand. His signature looked like a river he still remembered how to draw. After, in the parking lot, Mom leaned against the passenger door and said, "Do you know how these things go, Mara? It's mostly about taxes and clarity. The stores are assets. The house is sentiment." I know, I said, even though I didn't. I had never allowed my brain the luxury of picturing what would happen after. I took the folder Mr. Hale gave us and put it in my bag alongside my to-do list and a smashed granola bar. Within a month, Dad's tired had a name whispered through clinical lips in a sterile room. Frontotemporal dementia. It arrived like a stunt driver, noisy, reckless, impossible to negotiate with. His personality blurred at the edges. He became impatient with tasks he used to enjoy. He forgot to eat and then ate twice. He laughed in the middle of sad stories and cried during commercials. Time unspooled strangely around him. Some days he was as he had always been. Others, he was a drifting boat. I kept rowing back to shore. The family reacted as we always did, in character and to type. I doubled down on practicalities, caregiver schedules, medication reminders, financial spreadsheets so tidy they felt like prayers. Mom staged the house like resilience was a style fresh peonies on the mantel. Lemon hand soap in the bathroom dispensers. A bowl of bright oranges that no one ever ate. Caleb visited one Sunday a month and spoke in volume about gratitude, like a podcast had told him to. We've got to appreciate the moments, he'd say, clapping Dad on the shoulder from a safe emotional distance. He always had to leave early for something he called a prospect. Naomi visited in Instagram-friendly bursts, bringing buttery croissants and airy compliments. She'd go kiss Dad on both cheeks. "You look so handsome, Uncle Patrick," she'd coo. "We're going to get you fresh and sharp again." Then she would angle her phone just so, taking a photo of their heads together. She was careful never to post anything that made him look frail. "Brand is care," she once told me breezily while I turned off the wrongly reset oven. "We're not being misleading. We're curating." "Curating what?" I asked. "Hope," she said, with a shrug that told me hope was best when filtered. I would have forgiven even that, perhaps. If it's a month before Dad died, Naomi hadn't caught me in the hallway outside my parents' bedroom and said, You know, legally speaking, Aunt Lydia will probably need help navigating the estate. Her tone was pure suggestion, like asking if I wanted oat milk. It's a lot of paperwork. Mr. Hale is handling it, I said, adjusting my ponytail to have something to do with my hands. And I help. We're fine. I just mean you're very busy and these things can be complicated. She tilted her head. We can all do our part. Family, I decided to hear the good in her voice that day. I decided a lot of things then because deciding made the world feel briefly obedient. Dad died on a Saturday in late spring when the magnolia tree my mother tended like a child was dropping its last white saucers onto the grass. He went in his sleep with the television murmuring a nature documentary to the dark. I found him when I came by at 8 to bring fresh bread. His hand was cool, not cold, the way countertops are. I sat, I told him nothing and everything. We're fine, I thought. I've got it. The lie I'd practiced for years. Grief is busy in the beginning. There were calls to the funeral home, to Caleb, to Naomi. To Mr. Hale, there were people, neighbors bringing casseroles, acquaintances making sympathetic eyes, relatives arriving like the backs of old photographs. Mom moved through it like a hostess with a headache. She wore a black dress I'd never seen and lipstick I had. She put her hands on people's arms and said thank you in a voice that made the phrase sound like a spell. At the funeral, Caleb gave a eulogy that mostly consisted of anecdotes that were almost true. Dad always told me that the right tool makes the job easier, he said. Holding up a hammer he'd borrowed from the store for the occasion, he taught me to show up. My mother nodded as if she hadn't spent years trying to teach him the same thing with more effort and less success. Naomi sang a hymn in a voice that would have gotten her a call back, if not the role. I stood up last. I didn't have a hammer or a hymn. I had the small, unglamorous truth that Dad had a way of seeing the part you were most ashamed of and treating it like a piece that still belonged to your whole. I said, my father loved to fix things, not because he didn't believe in breaking, but because he believed in what came after. My voice surprised Milo, steady, like stepping onto a boat that didn't wobble. He told me once that mending assumes there's something worth keeping. I want to keep the version of each of us that he spoke toward the part that chose care over cleverness, curiosity over pride. After the last shovel of dirt, after the sandwiches and the last gasp in the quiet that comes like tidal water, Mom and I sat at the kitchen table with the magnolia shadows making lace on the floor. We'll go see Mr. Hale in a week, she said, businesslike. There are practicalities. Of course, I said. I'll put it on the calendar. She took my hand. Your father loved you so very much, she said, as if she needed to deliver this to me in person and make me sign for it. He saw you. I know, I said, because I did. Because even during the bad months, when names were slippery and forks were confusing, he recognized my laugh across the house. The week that followed lived in that suspended state that comes after a loss. Everything is both urgent and unimportant. I still woke at 6, brewed coffee, and checked store emails despite knowing I wasn't needed right now. Grief is not productivity, I reminded myself, loading the dishwasher. Still, the world insisted on tasks. People wanted to be told what to bring to the memorial garden. The stores needed me to sign off on a pallet of socket wrenches. The landlord wanted to know if I was renewing my lease. Caleb did not like tasks. He stopped by with flowers that looked expensive and asked me to handle the will meeting. He was, predictably, in the middle of a big deal and might be in and out. He was always in and out of things, like a breeze through a screen door. Naomi texted me hearts and white dove emojis, and then, anything I can take off your plate? Even administrative. I'm good with forms. She added a sparkle emoji, which in her vocabulary meant I want to be seen helping. I typed back, we're meeting Mr. Hale next Thursday at 4. If you want to come to support Aunt Lydia, she might appreciate it. She responded instantly, of course, family first. I read the message twice, trying to ignore the tiny static of unease it left in me, like the memory of a bad dream right before waking. On Tuesday, I cleaned out Dad's workshop. It felt wrong to call it a shed, even though it was technically a shed. He had organized it with the same gentle competence he tried to pass down to me, Jars labeled with sizes of screws. Wood planers hung with red twine, the smell of cedar and machine oil. I ran my fingers over the bench as if it were a piano and the right music might bring them back. I found projects in progress. A birdhouse half-painted, a picture frame with mitered edges waiting for glue. It felt like walking in on a conversation I wasn't supposed to overhear. I took the frame home and finished it at my kitchen table. It fit a photo of us from a summer fair 10 years ago, where we had bought too many kettle corn bags and laughed about caramel sticking to our molars. In the picture, he's wearing a silly paper crown from the ring toss booth. He looks like a man who would always be there. I put the frame on my bookshelf and then sat on the floor beside it and allowed myself to cry the small, private cry I hadn't had time for yet. It didn't feel like a scream or a flood. It felt like a leak finally acknowledged. I miss you, Dad, I thought. I have been missing you for months, but now I can name it. On Wednesday night, I made a list for the meeting. Bring Dad's folder from Mr. Hale. Bring my notes on the store's finances. Ask about provisions for Mom House accounts. Clarify shares of business send-by-sell agreements. Ask about the workshop, the inventory, the charitable fund Dad mentioned for vocational scholarships. I put the list in my bag and then took it out again. I added, be steady. Thursday arrived with a hard blue sky and air that felt scrubbed. Mom wore a navy suit and her wedding pearls. It's silly to dress up for a lawyer, she said, smoothing the lapel. But your father always liked us to look like we knew what we were doing. Maybe we do, I said, opening the front door for her. We met in Mr. Hale's conference room, very glass, very neat, a bowl of green apples that might have been fake. Oh, they were so unblemished. Caleb was late by 13 minutes, which he announced by sweeping into the room and saying, "Sorry all, traffic." He did not smell like traffic. He smelled like cologne and a different woman's perfume. Naomi and Aunt Viv arrived with a flurry of concern, hugs that lingered half a second too long, and the faintest air of already knowing something. I told myself I was imagining it. Naomi set a notebook on the table-lined leather, monogrammed. She clicked her pen. Aunt Viv clutched a tissue like a prop. Mr. Hale greeted us all with the grave kindness of a man who has navigated more than one family through the narrow strait between grief and money. "First, let me extend my condolences again," he said, folding his hands. "I knew your husband, Lydia. He was decent in a way that made my job easier and, frankly, my days better. He planned carefully, even as his illness progressed. That planning will serve you now." Mom nodded barely. "You all know there's a will," Mr. Hale continued. "To prevent misunderstandings, I intend to read it aloud in full. There is also a trust document and a letter of intent regarding the business assets." He touched the stack of papers with a gentle, proprietary palm. "We will take each in turn." Something in the room shifted like the pressure before a storm. Naomi sat a little straighter. Caleb loosened his tie with what he must have thought was discretion. The gesture glittered with expectation. I had hope, but not entitlement. I had spent years in practical proximity to the store's balancing books, fixing delivery mishaps, hiring on holiday weekends when everyone else needed to unplug. Still, women in families like mine learn early the difference between being essential and being acknowledged. I braced for the worst version of that difference and promised myself not to make a scene if it arrived. As Mr. Hale cleared his throat, my mother's hand found mine under the glass table. Her palm was cold. "Whatever it is," she whispered without moving her lips, "we handle it as a unit." "Of course," I whispered back. It was then that Naomi leaned forward, a lock of perfect hair falling across her cheek, and said, as if casual, just to flag Uncle Patrick and I talked a lot in the last year about legacy. I know he wanted things to be fair. She gave me a quick, bright smile that flashed like a blade. Fair to everyone who stepped up. The words hit my chest like a small, well-aimed stone. Everyone who stepped up. The implication was precise. The implication was a hook. Caleb nodded as if in agreement, as if he had also stepped up somehow when I wasn't looking. Aunt Viv dabbed her eyes for emphasis, though the tissue remained theatrically dry. Mr. Hale's expression didn't change. Perhaps he had heard every version of this preamble before. He opened the will. The sound of paper sliding against paper was a whisper of consequence. "Shall we begin?" he said. And in that brief moment before he read my father's last words into the room that would decide what came next, something cold and certain touched the base of my neck, feeling like standing in the doorway of your own home and finding the furniture rearranged. "Be steady," I told myself. "Whatever happens, you know what you know." You were there. I pictured Dad's workshop and the jars of screws, each labeled by size and type. I pictured the frame, I finished corners snug, purpose clear. My father had believed in keeping things worth keeping. The question was whether anyone else in this room did. Mr. Hale cleared his throat. Naomi's pen hovered over her notebook like a poised insect. Caleb pulled his chair in with a scrape that made my teeth sting. My mother's pearls floated on her collarbone, bright as a constellation. It was a simple room growing suddenly complicated. I felt the floor tilt just a degree. I thought, this is how stories turn quietly at first. And I had no idea then just how far the floor was going to drop. The first words Mr. Hale read were dry and legal, like pebbles spilled onto a table. "I, Patrick Ellison, being of sound mind and body, do hereby declare this to be my last will and testament." His voice was even deliberate, as though he had read these sentences to 100 other families, each convinced their story was unique. But to me, every syllable was a stone laid down in a path I was being forced to walk. My father's name on those papers, his wishes compressed into paragraphs, that was him speaking. Him trying to be present from wherever he had gone. At first, it was exactly what I expected. The house to my mother, Lydia, with full rights to sell or remain. A modest charitable trust, in his words, to support vocational training for those who choose the dignity of work with their hands. I swallowed when I heard that because I remembered our conversation at the kitchen table about learn and mend. He had been serious. He had tried to make that dream real. Then came the stores. The hardware chain. The thing I had spent the last decade of my life keeping alive while Caleb was shaking hands at golf clubs and Naomi was filming herself lighting candles for ambiance. The Ellison Hardware Company and all subsidiaries, Mr. Hale read, shall be transferred in ownership to my daughter, Mara Ellison, with full authority to operate, restructure, or sell, according to her judgment. My breath caught. The words hung there like church bells. To my daughter Mara, I didn't know whether to cry or exhale. My father had seen me, not just as the steady one, not just as the helper. He had given me the helm, but the silence that followed was louder than any bell. Caleb cleared his throat, his face stiffening into something that looked like polite disbelief. "Wait," he said finally, his voice carrying the casual tone he used in negotiations right before he demanded more commission. "Did you say Mara?" Mr. Hale didn't look up. "That is correct. The hardware company and all associated assets are assigned to Mara Ellison." Naomi shifted in her chair, leaning forward as if she were the cross-examiner and I was the defendant. "That's surprising," she said, her smile tight, eyes sharp. "Considering how much time Uncle Patrick spent with me in those last months. He told me more than once how important it was to keep things in the family. They're in the family," I said before I could stop myself. My voice came out smaller than I wanted. Defensive. "Yes," Naomi said smoothly. "But when he said family, I don't think he meant just one person." Aunt Viv sniffled dramatically. "Patrick always had such a generous heart. He wouldn't have wanted anyone to feel left out." Mr. Hale continued, unbothered by the tension slicing through the air. He read on. Life insurance policies, small bequests to a couple of old friends. Even my father's request that the magnolia tree never be cut down while my mother lived in the house. But none of it mattered. The stores were the center of gravity, and the gravity had shifted. Then came the line that knocked the air from me. All remaining liquid assets, investment accounts, and cash holdings shall be distributed to my niece, Naomi Price. The words landed like a gavel. Naomi inhaled, her hand covering her mouth in a performance of shock. "Oh, Uncle Patrick," she whispered, as if she were receiving a crown rather than money. Caleb's jaw tightened. his face colored with something between rage and embarrassment. "So Mara gets the business," he said flatly, "and Naomi gets the money. What exactly am I supposed to get here?" A pat on the back. Mom's pearls glinted as she lifted her chin. "Caleb, no, Mom," he snapped. "Don't Caleb me? I'm the oldest. I'm the son. Dad built those stores with me running around in the aisles. And you're telling me he just what?" Handed everything over to her. He jabbed a finger in my direction. I wanted to sink into my chair, disappear into the cool glass walls, but I forced myself to meet his eyes. My hands trembled under the table. "I worked those stores, Caleb, day in, day out. You know that." "You manage them," he shot back. "That's different than owning. That's different than carrying the family name." Naomi placed her hand delicately over his. "I know it feels unfair, Caleb, I know." She looked at me with her lips pursed in sympathy, but her eyes were sparking with triumph. "It's just, Uncle Patrick must have seen where true potential lay." "Enough," Mom said sharply. Her voice cracked against the air. "We will not do this here." But it was too late. The words had been flung, and humiliation seeped into my skin like ink. My brother's resentment, my cousin's smugness, my aunt's sighs. They looked at me not as the girl who had driven Dad to every doctor's appointment, balanced the books, carried the weight, but as an interloper who had stolen something they believed was theirs by right. Mr. Hale closed the folder gently, as though to signal the reading was over. "These were your father's wishes. I can assure you the documents are legally binding." Naomi tilted her head. "Of course. We're all just trying to honor Uncle Patrick, but I think it would be wise to look at this carefully. Sometimes people don't quite understand what they're signing, especially toward the end." Her voice was sugar, but her meaning was acid. She was implying that Dad hadn't known what he was doing, that his dementia had clouded his judgment, that what he gave me wasn't valid. "Don't you dare," I whispered, my throat burning. Naomi blinked innocently. "Don't I dare what?" "You weren't there," I said louder. "You weren't the one in the store at midnight doing payroll. You weren't the one," my voice broke, but I pushed through. "You weren't the one holding his hand when he forgot the word for hammer." "I was." Caleb leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms. "And yet somehow you walked away with everything. Doesn't quite add up, does it?" The humiliation was complete. My cousin with her perfect hair, my brother with his careless smirk, my aunt dabbing dry eyes, all of them circling like vultures, and me in the center, stripped bare. My mother sat silent, her face unreadable. And I couldn't tell if she was ashamed for me or of me. Mr. Hale tapped the folder, his voice measured. "There is one more addendum to review," he said. "But perhaps we should take a short recess first. These matters are often emotional." Naomi smiled sweetly, her hand brushing over the folder as if it already belonged to her. Caleb muttered something about legal tricks under his breath. I sat frozen, every muscle in my body tense, heat crawling up my neck. My father had seen me, he had trusted me, but in this room, it didn't matter. To them, I was the thief, the usurper, the undeserving daughter. And as Naomi leaned close to whisper to Caleb, her voice just low enough that I couldn't make out the words, I realized something deep and cutting. This wasn't just about money or stores. This was about power, control, who got to define my father's legacy. And at that moment, humiliated, cornered, my heart hammering, I thought, they're going to try to take it all from me. The conference room was silent except for the hum of the air conditioning. My humiliation still clung to me like smoke. Caleb was sulking with his arms crossed. Naomi was scribbling something in her monogrammed notebook with a smirk. And Aunt Viv was sighing loudly enough for sympathy points. Mr. Hale adjusted his glasses and tapped the folder gently, like a judge calling order. "I understand emotions are high," he said, calm as stone. "But as I mentioned, there is one more document. An addendum your father insisted be included. It was unusual, but perfectly valid." Naomi straightened in her chair, all performance now. "Unusual? In what way?" Mr. Hale ignored her tone. He slid a crisp second page out from the back of the will. Your father wrote this himself. He was adamant it be read in the presence of all family members. The room seemed to lean forward. My pulse thudded in my ears. Mr. Hale began to read, "To my children and loved ones. By now you will know how I've divided the tangible things, the house, the accounts, the stores. But I also know my family well enough to predict that what I've left will not satisfy everyone. So let me be clear. This division is not an accident. It is not confusion. It is not dementia. It is my choice." Naomi's pen froze. Caleb's jaw tightened. Mr. Hale's voice didn't falter. "To my son Caleb, you are my firstborn, and I love you. But love and entitlement are not the same. I gave you every chance to show responsibility, and you often chose comfort instead. I hope this disappointment wakes you, not breaks you. To my niece Naomi, you brought brightness into my later years, and for that I am grateful. But brightness is not substance. The money I left you will vanish if you treat it as a stage prop. I pray you will prove me wrong." Naomi gasped audibly, her hand flying to her mouth. The sweetness drained from her face, replaced by a sharp, offended flush. And then Mr. Hale looked at me before continuing. "To my daughter, Mara, you are the steady one. You gave without asking. You worked without applause. You carried me when I could no longer carry myself. That is why the business is yours, because it is already in your hands. But know this, the stores are only part of what I leave you. The real legacy is the trust I built quietly over the last 20 years. You will find instructions with Mr. Hale. The assets within that trust will surprise you. They surprised even me. And Maref, anyone challenges you, remember this letter. I meant every word. This is my will, in all senses of the phrase." The room went still. My chest felt heavy and light all at once. "Trust?" Caleb barked, breaking the silence. "What trust? That wasn't in the first reading." "Correct," Mr. Hale said evenly. "Your father created a separate family trust that he did not want detailed until this moment. It contains substantial investments, accounts, and property, all of which are designated to Mara." Naomi's chair screeched against the floor as she shot up. "That's impossible. Uncle Patrick told me he wanted me taken care of. He said I was like a daughter to him." Mr. Hale folded the second page calmly. "He has, indeed, taken care of you. The liquid assets you inherit are significant. But the trust is separate. And it is explicitly and solely for Mara." Aunt Viv sputtered. But surely he didn't mean for my Naomi to be left with scraps?" "Scraps," I whispered, finally finding my voice. "He left her more money than most people see in a lifetime." Naomi turned on me, her mask slipping. "You don't understand, Mara. Money runs out. A business," she gestured at the papers. "A trust, that's power. That's status. That's what matters." And in that moment, I saw her clearly, not as my cousin, not as my father's bright visitor, but as someone who believed the world owed her a spotlight. Caleb slammed his hand on the table. "This isn't fair. He wasn't himself when he signed this. He was confused. He didn't know what he was doing." Mr. Hale's gaze hardened. "Your father recorded a video with me confirming his intentions. It is time-stamped, witnessed, and legally binding. His mind was clear in those hours. Would you like me to play it now?" The blood drained from Caleb's face. Naomi sat back down abruptly, her lips trembling with suppressed rage. Aunt Viv's tissue finally grew damp. I, meanwhile, felt something I hadn't felt in months, years maybe. Not just grief. Not just responsibility. Vindication. For once, my father's voice was louder than theirs. He had spoken from beyond the grave, cutting through their entitlement with words no one could twist. And yet, beneath the vindication, a current of dread stirred. Because I knew my family well enough to understand, this was not the end of their scheming. It was only the beginning. Naomi leaned toward me, her whisper venomous. "Enjoy it while you can, cousin. You think you've won, but this isn't over. Her words slithered under my skin, but I held my ground. For the first time, I realized that the inheritance wasn't just a gift. It was a battlefield. And I was standing at the center. The days that followed the will reading were thick with tension, like a storm that refused to break. I went home that evening with the second page of the will folded neatly into my bag. But it might as well have been burning through the leather. My father's words echoed in my head, his faith in me. His warning about Naomi and Caleb, his insistence that what he chose was deliberate. For the first time in my life, I felt the weight of power. And for the first time, I realized just how far my family would go to rip it away. It started small. Caleb called me 2 days later, his tone falsely casual. "Look, Mara, I've been thinking," he said. "You're not really cut out for running the stores alone. You're good with details, sure, but leadership, strategy, that's not you." I closed my eyes. "Breathe, Mara. I've been running those stores in all but name for years. Caleb, you know that?" "Yeah, but optics matter," he snapped. "The staff doesn't respect someone who hides in the office crunching numbers. They want someone dynamic, charismatic, like me. Dynamic enough to vanish once a month." I shot back. "Charismatic enough to miss payroll twice." There was silence, then a sharp exhale. "Fine. But when the employees start questioning your decisions, don't come crying to me." By the end of the week, I discovered what he meant. 2 managers called me separately, nervous. "We've heard rumors," one said hesitantly, "that the stores are going to be sold. That you don't plan to keep us on." I knew immediately where it came from. Caleb's whispers, dripping poison into ears that didn't know me as well as they should. Naomi, meanwhile, launched her attack in the public sphere. She posted a glossy photo of her and my father, captioned, "Forever grateful for the man who believed in me. Carrying on your vision, Uncle Patrick." #legacy, #family first. The comments rolled in. "So proud of you, Naomi. You deserve it all." He knew who to trust. I wanted to scream. My father's actual words, his actual trust, were buried beneath hashtags and filtered smiles. But then I remembered what Mr. Hale had said. There is a video. A week later, I called Mr. Hale. "I think it's time," I said. He nodded solemnly when we met at his office. "I thought you might say that." He pulled out a USB drive and slid it across the desk. "Your father insisted on this. He wanted no doubt, no loopholes. He sat right there in that chair and told the camera why he chose as he did." I swallowed hard. "Can I see it?" The screen flickered, and then there was my dad live, smiling, wearing his favorite checked shirt. My breath hitched. "If you're watching this," he began, "it means I'm not there to argue for myself. So I'll say it plain. Mara deserves the stores. She's kept them alive. She's earned them. This isn't about tradition or birth order. It's about merit." He paused, his expression softening. "Caleb, I love you, son. But you've got to stop assuming the world owes you something just for showing up. Naomi, you're charming as ever, but charm fades. Work doesn't, and work is what Mara does." My throat burned. I pressed my hand over my mouth to keep from sobbing. "This is my choice," Dad said firmly. "Not confusion. Not coercion. My choice. And if anyone doubts it, play this tape." The screen went black. I looked at Mr. Hale. "Send me a copy." The opportunity came sooner than I expected. Naomi had organized a family meeting, though it was really a performance. She rented a private dining room at a restaurant downtown, complete with candles and a charcuterie board she photographed before touching. When I walked in, I knew instantly this was an ambush. Caleb was already there, arms crossed, glaring at me like I'd stolen not just money, but his entire identity. Aunt Viv dabbed her eyes, murmuring about Patrick's real wishes. Naomi stood at the head of the table, her phone poised as though ready to record her victory. "Cousin," she said brightly, "we need to talk. Everyone feels that things are unbalanced. And for the sake of family harmony, we think it's best if you step back from the business and let someone more." She glanced at Caleb. "Suited take charge." I sat down slowly. "And who decides that?" "You?" "Uncle Patrick wanted fairness," Naomi said, her tone sugary. "We all know dementia clouds judgment. He probably thought he was doing the right thing, but stop," I said sharply. The room fell silent. I pulled the small projector from my bag and set it on the table. "You want to know what Dad wanted? Let him tell you himself." Naomi's face drained of color. "What is that?" "Proof." I pressed play. And there he was, my father, clear-eyed, steady, unflinching. His words filled the room, every sentence a nail sealing the coffin on their lies. Caleb shifted uncomfortably. Aunt Viv's tissue fluttered uselessly in her hand. Naomi's mouth fell open. When the video ended, silence pressed heavy over us. Then I leaned forward. My voice was calm, but steel ran through it. "You will not twist his memory. You will not call him confused or weak. He knew exactly what he was doing. He chose me. And if you can't accept that, then you are choosing to dishonor him." Caleb stood abruptly, red-faced. "This is a setup. He was manipulated." Mr. Hale, who I had invited as a witness, cleared his throat. "The video is legally admissible. It was taken in my office, under my supervision. Your father was of sound mind. Any challenge will fail, and it will cost you dearly in court." Caleb faltered, his bluster collapsing into silence. Naomi, though, wasn't finished. She leaned forward, her eyes glittering with fury. "You may have the stores, Mara, but don't think for a second you'll win in the court of public opinion. People already believe I'm his legacy. I'll make sure of it." I looked her dead in the eye. "Then enjoy your likes and hashtags, Naomi, because while you're busy curating an image, I'll be building something real. Just like Dad taught me." Her lips trembled. For the first time, she had no comeback. The fallout came quickly. Caleb, true to form, tried to stir up the employees again. But when I played them the video at a staff meeting, they rallied behind me. "We always knew you were the real boss anyway," one of them said. And the rest nodded. Naomi attempted to post more tributes online, but the truth leaked quietly at first, then loudly. Screenshots of the video circulated. And comments turned against her. "He clearly left everything to Mara. Why are you acting like it's yours? Respect his wishes, Naomi." This is embarrassing. Her brand partnerships dried up within weeks. Sponsors don't like drama that makes them look foolish, and me. For the first time, I walked into the hardware stores not as the overlooked manager, but as the owner. Employees clapped when I spoke. Customers shook my hand. Justice, it turned out, wasn't loud or flashy. It was steady, solid, exactly the way my father had taught me to be. But still, when I locked up one evening, I whispered into the quiet aisles, "We did it, Dad. We did it." The first time I unlocked the front door of Ellison Hardware as its official owner, I felt something I hadn't expected. Not triumph. Not vindication. Just stillness. For years I had been running the place in practice, but never in name. I had carried ledgers home on the bus, stayed up late fixing supply chain messes, and stepped into Dad's shoes long before I admitted that he was slipping out of them. But now, as the key turned and the lock clicked open, the word owner wrapped itself around me like a coat that finally fit. I walked the aisles slowly that morning, running my fingers over the neatly lined shelves. Screws, bolts, paint cans in rows like soldiers. Dad's presence was everywhere, stitched into every label, every piece of lumber. I whispered, "It's ours, Dad. I'll keep it safe." Naomi didn't call me again after the video was played. At first I expected her to keep fighting, to launch some dramatic campaign, but instead she went silent. Her silence, however, was not peace, it was retreat. I saw her posting on social media less and less, and when she did, the comments weren't kind. People had seen through her. Some accused her of exploiting my father's memory. Others mocked her hashtags. A few even demanded she apologize. Her brand deflated like a balloon left out overnight. One day I scrolled through my feed and realized her account was gone, deleted, vanished. As though she'd tried to erase the evidence of her humiliation. Aunt Viv avoided me in public after that. When I did see her at church one Sunday, she pressed her lips together and looked away. Perhaps she still believed her daughter had been wronged. Perhaps she couldn't face the truth that her perfect Naomi had been exposed. Either way, it wasn't my burden anymore. Caleb. Well, Caleb was Caleb. He sulked for a month, then reappeared, asking if I wanted to partner with him on some real estate venture. When I refused, he called me selfish. But I saw through him. He didn't want partnerships. He wanted access. Dad had been right. Caleb had lived too long believing the world owed him. Maybe someday he'd wake up. Maybe not. Through it all, my mother was the hardest to read. After the will reading, she grew quiet. Not angry, not defensive. Just quiet. Some evenings, I'd sit with her in the kitchen while she stirred her tea without drinking it. One night, she finally spoke. "You know," she said softly, "your father and I argued about the will. I told him it would tear the family apart. He just smiled and said, maybe it'll show them who they really are." Her eyes glistened. He was right, wasn't he? I reached for her hand. He was. She squeezed my fingers, and for the first time, I saw her not as the brittle perfectionist I'd grown up with, but as a woman who had loved a man fiercely and lost him. She wasn't the villain in my story. She was just another character stumbling through grief. Owning the stores changed me. Suddenly, people who had once looked past me turned to me for answers. And I discovered that leadership wasn't about being the loudest or the flashiest. It was about showing up. It was about listening. I started the community program Dad and I had dreamed of. Learn and Mend. Saturday mornings, the back room filled with kids and retirees and single moms, all learning to fix lamps, patch drywall, build shelves. Watching them reminded me of Dad's words. Mend assumes there's something worth keeping. I realized then the stores weren't just about profit. They were about people, about teaching them not just to buy tools, but to use them, to trust their own hands. One evening, months later, I drove to the cemetery. The magnolia tree near Dad's grave had just begun to bloom again, its petals soft and white against the grass. I knelt, brushing dirt from the headstone. "Dad," I whispered, "they tried to take it all. They tried to call you confused, tried to make me small. But your words cut through. You saw me. And I'm going to spend the rest of my life proving you were right too." The wind stirred the branches, and for a moment could almost hear his chuckle, the one that always carried patience and warmth. I placed the finished picture frame I'd made from his workshop beside the stone. The one with us at the fair laughing with kettle corn stuck in our teeth. It felt right. It felt like mending. As I walked back to my car, I realized something. Justice doesn't always look like punishment. Sometimes it looks like truth finally being heard. Sometimes it looks like the quiet satisfaction of stepping into your life without apology. Naomi may have stolen attention. Caleb may have tried to steal authority. But in the end, neither of them could steal the one thing that mattered: my father's trust in me. That was the inheritance. Not the stores, not the money. The belief that I was enough. And that, I vowed, was something I would never let go of. And that's how it all ended. Justice delivered and the truth finally revealed. If this story kept you hooked until the very last word, don't forget to hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow and lets me know you want more stories like this. Make sure you subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss the next tale of betrayal, revenge, and sweet, sweet justice. And tell me in the comments, what would you have done in Mara's shoes? Would you have fought back the same way or walked away? I read every comment and I love hearing your thoughts. Until next time, stay strong, stay sharp, and remember, in every family drama, the truth always finds a way out.